Well, hello everyone. I hope everybody's doing good tonight. It's about 6 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and begin. And we got some presentations to do tonight, and I want to make sure everybody has sufficient time to do all they want to do. In terms of the presentations, we'll talk in a bit about the assignments coming up, but just remind you that this is the Tuesday night that we'll have, and then next week we'll be off for spring break, and so we want to see if we can finish all this up tonight. So let me check and make sure. Can folks hear me okay? Somebody give me a heads up.
Yes.
Very good, very good. Thank you, thank you. Okay, I have no particular order. It doesn't matter to me what order we go in tonight, and so I know some of you like to go early and some of you like to go last or late, and so either way is fine with me. So who would like to start us off tonight?
I'll go.
Okay, very good, Jan. Do you have you want to pull your PowerPoint up there and control it from your end?
If I can, let's see.
Go ahead and pull it up, and I'll make you the host.
All right, hang on a minute. Last time I don't think it worked, so
We'll try it again.
Okay. Sorry, it's
okay. Well, hang on a second. Let me try something here on my end. Let me see if I can bring it up. And take back just a second. Hang on just a second. I will bring it up, and then I think I can turn it back over to you. So hang on just a second, since you sent it to me. All right. Do you all see Jan's presentation?
yes.
Okay. Again, let me see if I can turn the host duties back over to you and see if that will allow you to make it work.
Do I do the share screen, right?
I think, can you see your presentation on the screen?
I do.
I believe you can now go to slideshow and start it like you would normally. I believe you're in control of it, if I'm not mistaken. See if you can do that.
It will not let me. It will not let me select anything.
Okay, hang on. Give it one more try here. I do not mind doing it, but I always like for you guys to be in control if you want to be. So, hang on here. Yeah, I don't think it's going to work. So let me just go ahead and do it.
I'm sorry.
No, it's not a problem. I just, I know sometimes when you're doing presentation, it kind of trips you up a little bit when I'm doing it and you're not doing it, but I think we can do that. It's not a problem. I do not mind doing it at all. So hang on. Okay. So I'm going to go. Hang on one second. Share the screen. Can you all still see the presentation?
Not right now.
Okay. Tell me when you can. You see it yet?
No.
Okay, hang on.
I see it.
Yeah.
It went away. It's back.
Okay. I get it to start now. There we go. All right. Is that good?
That's good.
Okay.
You can go to the first slide, the next one.
All right.
I just wanted to start. My project was on grading, the history of grading practices, because it is related to my reform plan that I'm working on. And I just go back to Tyack and Cuban when we talked about it earlier in the semester about the grammar of schooling and how it's a product of history. And it's very much a fight for what you know, different beliefs and holding on to those beliefs down to the bitter end. And sometimes a result of societal issues. And okay, the next slide. And as I read research and stories about schools that have tried to make changes to grading practices, there are a lot of violent stories out there and bad experiences that school districts have experienced. And Lynn Olson, a comment that struck me, something that she said in an article, was that she referred to grading practices as one of the most sacred traditions in American education, and that they have acquired an almost cult-like importance in American schools. And that struck me as I read a lot of the different stories of mostly failures at attempts to make grading practice change. Okay, next slide. I just thought this was kind of funny. Despite research, and I'm talking about research of grading practices for the last 100 years or more, nothing has really changed in the cartoon there. It's still, it still strikes a nerve with parents, students, educators. The only thing is the focus has changed more. The focus, the scrutiny, the questioning, the blame, whatever aspect has shifted toward educators more so than in this cartoon from 1960 to 2010. Next slide. I like this one too, because it kind of reminds me of what's going on. Things like classifying, ranking, and grading have been common practices for 150 years. And there are layers of dependency, as this cartoon also illustrates, the dependency from one level to the next on what happens in a classroom. Okay, next slide. I thought about the best way to summarize what's happened in education with a focus on grading, just starting with periods of time within centuries. The first school, and we all studied about the first Latin school in Massachusetts. And back in the 1700s, from the 1647 into the 1700s, education was the original schools. Students were sent for because it was faith-based and to learn the right morals. Then Franklin's Academy introduced in Philadelphia schooling for subjects and areas that were helpful, like in agriculture. And in terms of grading during these times, grades they weren't grades per se, but progress was communicated orally and narratively to the students and parents. A lot of educators made home visits to discuss their students' progress. And then in the early 1800s, the grading practices started changing, It was Yale. It's attributed to Yale University. The model after European countries by, I think it was Ezra Stile. He was the president. He started by using 4 descriptors of students, a 4-point scale, and this use in Yale, it trickled down to the schools at the time. And some researchers call his work and the use of a scale as the origin of the 4.0 system. Another very influential practice was the Cambridge Tripos exam, where students participated in oral exams for several days. And each day the kids were ranked as they completed their oral exams, and they were all vying for like the top position on the final day of exams, because those students received an endowment if they were the top student. And then students who scored at the bottom of the ranking at the end of their oral exams went with a reputation as not being so bright. This was actually one of the precursors, as being attributed as a precursor to the 100-point scale and using percentages, and then our A to F grading system. The early 1800s also was Horace Mann, and most of us have heard about Mr. Mann. He lived in Massachusetts and started one of the first departments of education in Massachusetts. And a lot of our ideas that are current today about education that should be paid for, controlled, and maintained by the public for public best interest. It should embrace children from all ethnic, social backgrounds. We should be using pedagogy of a free society and free of religious influence. And he helped introduce age grading steps in school rather than the one-room schools with one teacher and all ages together. He began introducing those steps. He also helped introduce oral examination, the move from oral exams to written exams, report cards, and the ranking systems. And with the report cards at that time were illustrated a student's success over time. And one of the things that was important to Mann was to decrease competition between students and to change and help them be more intrinsically motivated. By the time the Civil War ended, in 1865, a lot of uniformity of schools began, and more prescribed curriculum, hierarchy, grade leveling, and then measures of success and promotion. That was a result of an exponential population growth and industrialization, and it was the introduction of high schools as well. And then that's when we started seeing, especially in big cities, we had high schools that were, they started classifying students, and some of the labels were retarded and normal. And there was a lot of retention of students in poor communities, inner city communities, and in immigrant communities. And a lot of this was a result of the industrialization of the age as well after the Civil War. And again, the use of percentages and categories of students increased vastly. For instance, between the years 1870 and 1910, after high schools started, it went from 500 high schools in America to 10,000 high schools. So that was an indication of the growth and the industrialization that was occurring at that time. Also, during this time, you started there. efficiency became important, and so high schools started looking at the idea of units of credit. And at the turn of in the early 1900s, 1906, Henry Pritchett from the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching is accredited with the Carnegie unit, where students earn units of credit. And again, it was a primarily based or intended for college and universities, but the practice trickled down to the high schools, just so that they had a way of gauging students and their success as they moved on to high school. A couple of early reformers in the early 1900s were researcher Starch and Elliott, and they had some of the first research that showed that grading practices were too subjective. In their first year, they took work of 2 students and had different English teachers, and these were 2 English assignments, had different English teachers grade these 2 works. And they had, like, the first paper, they had scores everywhere from 64 to 98. The second year, they did the same thing with math assignment, and the math assignment, the scores were even wider range, from 50 to 97. And so out of their research, they discovered that teachers were very subjective in grading. Some stuck to they know the content, while others graded on grammar, neatness, punctuation, attendance, behavior. There was a wide range of reasons why teachers assign the score that they assigned to their work. And so this was their work in 1912 and 1913 is what's called the scientific approach to education and grading. That's when it was introduced, and with a lot of practices that we've all heard about. The result after the work of Starch and Elliott, then we started seeing more questioning of grading practices. And so one of the efforts, for instance, if you had the 0 to 100 point scale or percentage scales, a lot of people started using a 5 category system, like our A to F scale, simply because it lessened the categories or the options where students could be, where their work would be scored or their grades would be. And it still continues to be a common practice today. After their work also, we all know about the normal distribution or the bell curve, grading on a curve. Much of the work of the early 20th century research was focused on this phenomenon that arose actually from work in science and psychology. The basic pedagogy of the time was the belief of the innate intelligence and achievement, that they were directly correlated. And so the idea of the categorical grading spread, and the use of the normal distributions, regardless of how students scored. Teachers in the research, that was found that teachers would still try to make their class set of scores fit that normal distribution or bell curve. We also saw that also resulted in a lot of the sorting, ranking of students. For instance, Pavlov's work, and we all know about his work with the dog, training the dog with the bell, but that was actually an investigation of digestion. That's how it started, but the behaviorist movement of the time took that work and began applying it in a lot of behavior management in classrooms as well. The early 20th century is referred to in research as a progressive era. There were some attempts to at using different grading scales, different schools. One well-known plan was called the Dalton Plan, and it was based on the work of Maria Montessori. And she, at the point, at its peak in the early 20th century, there were as many as 162 high schools that adopted the plan. There was a lot of issues with fidelity and accountability. And by the early 1940s, and I think today there's just one school left that uses this Dalton Plan, which is a child-centered, individualized program where students have input and freedom in their own instruction throughout their educational experience. During the 1930s and 40s, a lot of research was conducted to determine or to look at the objectivity and uniformity of grades. And again, all the studies indicated that teacher judgment was a heavy influence on grading, and those are so subjective, they are not true indicators of student achievement. Let's see. In the late 40s, the two prevailing grading systems, and we use them today, a 4.0 and the A to F scale, was very prevalent in grading. And then by the 1950s, a lot of research was starting to show some of the unintended consequences in schools. In research, in the 50s, teachers were found to, as I said before, make grades fit the distribution. Teachers sometimes refuted the curve and they assigned grades that they thought was appropriate. Students learned to manipulate grades. Grades were inflated by things like behaviors and favors. Then the Vietnam War started. A political component of grading entered the picture. The draft deferment was an option for draftees if they were enrolled in college and had good grades. So there were dilemmas at the college level regarding inflation, and so that trickled down to high school in terms of preparation for college, because that was an important, for some people, serving in the military was not a goal for a lot of people at that time. Let's see. Another influential practice or happening that has influenced grading in the 20th century happened during World War I. The U.S. Army used something called an alpha test, and it was an aptitude test to help them determine the competencies of their enlistees and how to place them in the service. And it was a multiple choice test, easy to score, and viewed by everybody as successful in what it was supposed to do. And so that helped lead to a reliance on multiple choice types of tests. And then in the 40s came the SAT, and which was intended to show a student's success in college. And it was everyone felt it was so efficient, did such a great job at that time, that it led to developments like our mechanical grading devices we have, the addition of things like true-false questions, fill in the blank, and matching items. And so then following those things in the 50s and 60s were the prescribed courses, textbooks, predetermined tests and assessments that were all part of this, the influences of the SAT. There in the 20th century, what I'd focus more on are some of the most well-known researchers, because I could have gone hundreds of pages more, I guess, in the research, but I tried to highlight what's been occurring over the last 40 years in terms of research and what are the recommendations currently. The major researchers of our age right now, and no one can deny that grades are important, that we have to have a measure of learning. But as you will see, as I talk about the research of some of the most notable researchers, I did not find any of our notable researchers that did not recommend that we look at changing grading practices. So the first researcher that I have there on the slide is, I'm going to talk about Robert Marzano first, because his work, he and John Hattie have been probably had the longest or the farthest back reaching is in terms of time, the work that they've been doing. Marzano, he's been working on a lot of synthesis of research with his group of researchers, and he has, through his synthesis, he has indicated 3 problems with current grading practices. The first one is teachers include too many subjective grades, and they focus rather than focusing just on student achievement. They assign different weights to different kinds of assignments, and they misinterpret assessment scores. And Marzano's research is also, he indicates 5 key purposes of grading: current practice, administrative reasons, feedback regarding achievement, guidance, instructional planning, and motivation. And he does contend that grading is the primary factor of student achievement, but it should be based on 2 factors only: providing feedback to students and parents, and we should use a criterion reference approach to content goals. So, and this kind of leads into a lot of the curriculum changes that are going on right now. And we're talking about standards-based instruction, but he actually defines grading practices in 3 categories: norm reference grading, self-reference grading, and standards and standard-based grading. And he describes practices most commonly used today as norm referenced. And norm reference grading actually is a grading system that compares one student's performance to other students. The self-reference grading allows students to compare their performance to their previous performance. But standards-based grading allows students to compare their current performance or their learning standards in a specific subject, and then they have an opportunity, once they've mastered an objective, then they have the opportunity to move forward. There's a set of researchers also that, let me skip that. I'm going to go to John Hattie. John Hattie's a researcher from Auckland, and he, if you've ever heard of visible learning, that's the result of a lot of his work. And the visible learning, there are signposts, what he calls the 6 signposts of excellence. And most of them are related to grading practices. And some of the signposts related to learning and grades are that teachers need to be aware of what every student is thinking and knowing and be able to construct meaning. They need to know learning intentions and success criteria. And school leaders need to create school environments where error is welcomed as a learning opportunity. And Hattie, he has taken thousands and thousands of studies and analyzed the work that's been done in different areas of educational practice.
And by the way, John was at my alma mater, UNC Greensboro, for a while, and was actually on the committee for the other Dr. Boyles when she did her dissertation. So,
Oh, wow.
yeah, so John, we know John.
That's awesome.
Yeah, he's back in the far country now, down in Auckland, but he was in Greensboro for a while back in the early 2000s. Let's see, is that right? Laura finished up in 2003, so early 2000s, yeah.
Well, one of the things that I appreciated learning about was what he calls the 138 factors that influence learning, student learning. And he's taken these thousands of studies and he's ranked them based on their effect. And the number one factor that affects student achievement, and it has an effect of 1.44, is students' self-reporting of grades, gauging their own performance and achievement. And then the 10th in that ranking, and there are a lot of other areas of school that are influential, but the 10th on his list is feedback that students receive and having figuring out where gaps of knowledge are. So that's if you ever get a chance to see that list, it's interesting when you look at the ranking. This again is after all of his research, and he even has some negative influences, some negative effects, things like extrinsic rewards and programmed instruction, praise, punishment they all have effects that are in the negative values. And then Robert Marzano, if you'll go to the next slide, because I've got a different list.
Can make it good. There we go.
Let's see. Oh, go one more for just a minute, because I'm going to talk about Marzano's high reliability schools. And if you see the chart over there at the right, Marzano's work at his institute has been based on Hattie's work. And a lot of schools have instituted, like they would take one single factor from Hattie's work and try to focus on one or two things from his work to make change or to transform a school. But Marzano contends that you have to have this, and you have to have this hierarchy. And in this hierarchy, he has taken that 138 effective practices and combined them into, I guess, synthesize them into this hierarchy. So each one is, they're very much related, Hattie's work to Marzano's work. But this is interesting reading also, this high reliability schools. And if you see the levels, high reliability rated school operates at a level 5 with the competency-based education. So I started, in my mind, I looked at the levels, and I went to a PLC leadership meeting yesterday, and I guess it made me think about where we stand, and we're not very high on that list yet. So that I thought that was an interesting work that he's doing now. Let's see. Could you go back one slide? Another researcher that is newer on the scene, but her focus of her research is Kathy Vatterott, and her focus has been the need for a paradigm shift of learning. And that you see the chart, the little figure there to the right, what we know traditionally for grading to what what changes need to occur, what needs to happen in this paradigm shift. I thought her work was interesting because you're talking about higher order on every level. Evidence, higher order is rigor. Learning is defined by what students can do with what they work. A lot of Bloom's taxonomy skills. Another big researcher recently is Susan Brookhart, and her work has been on what students learn rather than what they earn, as she's a proponent of using common language and vocabulary. Carol Dweck, and I have read some of her things before. She focused on the fixed mindset of students versus growth mindset. And in her work, our traditional grading practices are part of a fixed mindset. And some of the things that the consequences in her research of having a fixed mindset is that students spend too much time being concerned about how smart they are. They spend their time and energy engaged in things that prove their intelligence, and then they avoid things that don't prove their intelligence. They don't recover well from disappointments. They're afraid of doing anything that will make them look inferior and dumb. And she contends from her work that it leads to students who look for easy reasons or excuses to quit. They'll tell you work is boring, and those are some examples of how that mindset is used. And so she's a proponent of the idea of growth mindset, where students enjoy what they're learning, they're challenged by their deficiencies, they track their own grades as they go. And those students that are in that setting where the teacher uses growth mindset, those students have been, she found them to be resilient and determined, and they actually outperform students with a fixed mindset. And let's see, and then there's Doug Reeves, and his work's been around for a long time. Let's see. Sorry, I lost my page. With Doug Reeves' work, some of the things, and I've kind of been thinking about this too, because I was a science teacher, so it's related to what I've done in the past in the classroom. But his research has shown that there are 3 big flaws in grading as we know it today in schools. He says that averaging grades is a wrong measurement of proficiency, that using a 0 on a 100-point scale is a mathematical error, and then the use of effective grading practices positively influences student attendance, discipline, and achievement. And so he's attributed with what is called holistic accountability, where the teacher creates the assessments based on their learning targets. And so I thought his work was interesting. A comment from him, or a quote. He said, if you ever want to make just one change that would immediately reduce student failure rates, then the most effective place to start would be challenging prevailing practices. Okay, so that's all I have to present. At the end, I did include some of my major references, and there are everyone that I've talked about tonight. There are some good videos, some quick clips where you can hear them explain what, their work and some of the principles that they recommend. Any questions?
Any questions for Jan? Chen, in your research, you talk about several of these people. Marzano, for example, has a belief or a paradigm that says there's norm reference grading and there's self-reference grading and there's standards-based grading. Of course, John's work on student achievement. Do you find that these authors are proposing a single grading strategy, or they're proposing multiple grading strategies? And by that I mean, do we differentiate with our grading strategies based on situation, circumstance, students, subject, any of that?
From what I've read, they're all proponents of standards based, but that standards based, by that they mean students are involved in tracking their learning as they go, having opportunities to learn what they didn't get the first time, and once they get it, then they go to the next level, and that's the personalization of grading and learning that was referenced by everybody. In terms of reporting, some of they gave examples of how, for instance, a report card, we could still report things like attendance, some behavior issues, the lates to class, things that aren't related to learning of specific goals. It involves changing report cards and to a rubric form and indicating that they've mastered as they move through curriculum, and that it would really be a report card based on each course and the content standards of a course. So it's very, does that answer?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
I think it does. I do, it's a complicated, it gets more complicated, as we go from, really what we've had is an outcomes-based system to a more competency-based system. It begins, and where you have self-reflection, I think it becomes harder and harder to document and quantify that in a way that's meaningful for at least parents who have gone through an objectives kind of education. And so it's hard to say, to report that. And I think that is a challenge that we're going to continue to face as we move toward more self-reporting and self-reflection and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. And that's the worst part.
Yeah.
That's been the hardest part for districts that have tried it, is parents and community.
Right. Yeah. Any other questions or comments for Jan?
Yeah, I like the way the chart that she had. It really gave us a very clear picture of how grading has changed over the past decade.
Yeah.
Actually, century. And so I really like the way that was done. It really cleared a lot of things with that. And I also like the references she had. I'm going to actually look up some of the researchers she had. I think the research was very good, and it would be very helpful with Vatterott and Brookhart. I'm very interested in what else they have out there. So I really appreciate it. It's a great job.
Okay. Good comments. And by the way, I didn't say this, but I will post these PowerPoints that those of you who have them, as a resource out there for you to call back and look at again. And so, you don't have to write all that down tonight. I'll post the PowerPoints. Okay. Good job. All right. Who would like to go next?
I'll go.
Okay. Hang on just a second, Dan. Let's try one more time and see if I can transfer it to you. Go ahead and pull your PowerPoint up, and I've got it here. If it doesn't work, go ahead and pull it up on your computer.
Okay.
And let me see if I can make you host. All right. Now, if you'll go down to the bottom of the share screen, you have that at the bottom. If you'll hover down at the bottom of your screen, little green box,
Okay.
and click on that, and it should open up for you another box that will have your PowerPoint somewhere in it. You'll have a small icon of your PowerPoint. You see it?
Uh-huh.
There we go. And so we see it coming up now. So if you'll do your slideshow just as you normally would do, and we got it. So we'll figure this thing out for the end of the semester. So Sharon, you're good to go.
And how do I move it?
Just click like you would normally click from your cursor. I mean, from your mouse, just like you normally would.
Okay.
I think.
All right. Okay. So I'm doing my research on the North Carolina kindergarten entry assessment, and this is actually I'm going to talk about this as a whole, but then I'm going to hone in some of the things that North Carolina is doing, because that's where my reform research is going to be coming from. It's going to be mostly coming from North Carolina, but I'll be talking about it as a whole tonight. So the background of the KEA, which is a kindergarten entry assessment, it was a way to see how well they're doing. And so there has been a lot of research that was done that wanted to see the neurological importance of the earliest years of life and how that affects them as they go through school and as they perform with life skills. So this is why this came into play. Many efforts are underway across the country and around the world to improve the quality of early education, in particular to advance the effectiveness of the pedagogy and the content of instruction for young children and their teachers. So that was a way to give them a guide. How do we assess how these students perform? And so that's why they did the kindergarten entry assessment, to give teachers some kind of guidelines on how to assess them. As a foundation for these quality improvement efforts, several states have developed early learning and developmental standards, which are called ELDS, to specify what young children should know and be able to do. Considerable attention is being directed to the development of assessments. And also, like I said earlier, this is motivated by the state's desire to improve the quality of services that children receive and to gauge the overall status of young children. And what they really want to do is they want to close the learning gap, because there's some learning gaps there. And they feel like if they can pinpoint it in kindergarten, it can help them as they go further along in school. There's at least 25 states now that have laws mandating some type of entry assessment. And right now, it's only 25 states, but I'm making an assumption that pretty soon, within the next 5 years or so, we would have the entire country doing this. There are 5 domains that they were looking at. The first one is language and literacy, how well students speak, listen. In kindergarten, they don't write so much, but they're learning. That's a learning process in kindergarten, teaching them their letters, how to trace and stuff like that. Physical health and motor development, and motor development, of course, would go with the tracing. And of course, their physical health, how healthy are these students? Social and emotional development, how well do they interact with others? General cognition, how well do they learn in general? And then their approaches to learning, what are the best ways that they learn? Is it visual? Is it kinesthetic? Is it audio? You know, these are things that they're looking at the very beginning of a child's school career. So beginning with the 2014-15 school year, all students entering kindergarten must be administered a developmental screening of early language, literacy, and math skills within 30 days of enrollment. And the kindergarten entry assessment is done within 60 days of enrollment. So when the students first come in, within the first 30 days, they're doing a screening. But later, all this information has to be put into a web-based scoring, if you will, like a scoring guide. And this goes in, it's technology-based, and the teachers would put this information in. The KEA must address the 5 essential domains of school readiness, what I just said before: language and literacy development, cognition, general knowledge, approaches towards learning, their physical well-being and motor development, as well as their social and emotional development. So if you think about Race to the Top, I know many of you know about Race to the Top. It's a grant given to schools that have more of the lower poverty. They have a lot of poverty, more poverty in certain states, so they would get more money depending on how they're where they are on the ladder as far as their demographics, and how they are as far as funding, what funding is needed based on students, I guess you would say socioeconomic class. So that's how they go by that. In response to the legislation passed by North Carolina's General Assembly and to meet the requirements of Race to the Top Early Learning Challenge Grant, the Office of Early Learning is designed to developmentally appropriate individualized assessment for K-3 children. This assessment will be used by all school districts and will be formative in nature and aligned with both the North Carolina's early learning and developmental standards and the standard course of study, which is the Common Core. So they're going to be aligned with the ELDS standards as well as the Common Core. It will build on the best of assessments currently being used in the early grades while broadening areas assessed to incorporate those 5 domains that I said earlier of development and learning included in the K-3 assessment. So we already have a K-3 formative assessment. And formative is more ongoing. It's not the summative. It's the opposite. Formative assessment can be anything. Just anything that you get to gauge how your student is learning, how the student is making sense of the concepts that are taught. You can write those down in notes. Formative assessments are ongoing. They're daily, and you all know about that. So when you're looking at, again, how the Race to the Top funding was, you can see North Carolina was #1, and then there's some other states there. Colorado finished 12th among 37 applicants for federal money to fund early childhood education. Only the top 9 were funded with those states, up to $70 million. And North Carolina, I think, received about $15.1 million to do that. And policy implications, politics always plays a key role in education. Roughly half of the states have instituted some form of kindergarten entry or readiness assessment, even before the development of such an assessment was highlighted in the Race to the Top Early Learning Challenge funding competition. So this was something that was already in place before, but they're just getting, I guess you could say, more, I don't know, it's getting more formalized. I guess that might be a word for it. The development of readiness assessments have varied across states in terms of the areas of child development and knowledge evaluated and their use for policy and practice purposes. The Center for Applied Research at the NAEYC has developed guidance to support state development and implementation of kindergarten readiness assessment systems. So we have different organizations and analysts are getting in here and they're putting their say in these assessments here. And I don't know if any of you have heard of the NAEYC, but that's a very prominent North Carolina. It's a lot. We have someone here in my school that's a member of that, and they really, what they do is advocate for young children. Such systems properly developed and implemented can contribute greatly to the success of early childhood programs and early elementary programming to identify and meet the needs of children entering kindergarten. Over the past few years, interest in assessing children as they enter kindergarten has gained momentum in states. Recent federal grant programs have required or emphasized the development of kindergarten entry assessments. And here's some other ones. We have the Race to the Top Early Learning Challenge, the Preschool Development Expansion Grants, and a research grant to 3 consortia of states to develop appropriate, valid kindergarten readiness assessments. Children who transition to kindergarten from Head Start will be assessed in kindergarten and how Head Start programs align to the state's definition of kindergarten readiness. It will impact choices of curricula and teaching practices, formative assessments, and other supports for children in preschool years. Kindergarten readiness. Policymakers, parents, and the public want to know that children are ready for kindergarten. What is the definition of kindergarten ready? So how do we gauge that? Questions that were asked. Policymakers wanted to find answers to these here. How will a child's readiness for kindergarten be assessed? These were questions that they had before they started putting these assessments into place. All this information help inform how to help all children to be ready for kindergarten, for the kindergarten year. So how will what they're learning help them? How will this information help all children be ready? Kindergarten entry assessments, sometimes known as kindergarten readiness assessments, are being developed by states to assess what children know and are able to do as they enter kindergarten. The results are used to inform better policies and resources for the years prior to kindergarten, such as Head Start, preschool, and to help provide high quality instruction and supports so that every child will be successful in the kindergarten year. And I would think the More at 4 program would also fall into that category of the years prior to kindergarten. This is a chart that I found at the Wake County website, Skills at Kindergarten Entry by Parent Education. And this was just something that I thought would be interesting to look at. And you can see it, parents' education correlates greatly with how much kindergarten students know when they come to school. And if you can see less than high school diploma, they're at about 25%. They have the scale score is 25. If you go to high school diploma or equivalent, it goes to 30 in reading, and then in math is a little bit lower, about 25. And then if you go to the executive function, that's how they can apply what they know, and their gross motor skills, their physical and social ability, all that follows under executive function. And you can see that's very low in kindergarten, which would be about right, because kindergarten students are kind of learning. They're still kind of new, learning how to apply themselves and do things. So that would be pretty common to see the executive function being low there. So if you just compare that, and you can see the graduate professional school, as the more education the parents have, the greater success the kindergarten students have. So it looks like a correlation there. Okay, I won't read all this to you. It's just telling you a little bit about North Carolina. It's used as a tool to help teachers. They can use observation and authentic evidence of learning what they gather during daily instruction. So this is an ongoing thing. And so teachers can gather this information when the students first come in. From the very first week of school, you can start making anecdotal notes, and seeing things that your students are doing and being able to document that stuff. It also provides general situations, examples of daily instructional experiences, as well as specific situations for teachers to use to elicit evidences of where children are with respect to their learning and development on the construct progressions. So it gives teachers a general knowledge, and also gives them specific knowledge. Depends on what they're looking for in a student. The North Carolina KIA situations are intended to provide children with opportunities to express themselves as individual learners. When engaging in North Carolina KIA situations, children make, do, say, or write something that will generate evidence of their learning and development. In addition, the North Carolina KIA includes tasks that teachers can use with individual children to help collect additional evidence if needed. The state of North Carolina requires that kindergarten children score in the 98th percentile on a standardized test of cognitive functioning and in the 98th percentile on a standardized test of reading or math achievement. So that they need to be up there. They can't be any lower than 98% to be considered proficient. Children can be evaluated after April 16th of each year, and testing results can be submitted to the school system throughout the summer. The assessment shall be administered at the classroom level in all LEAs aligned to North Carolina's early learning development standards and a standard course of study, and appropriate for use with all students. This right here just explains what the North Carolina KIA does, and most of them are this way. They're formative in nature, and what I was saying earlier, formative is ongoing. It's not summative, it's ongoing. It defines learning holistically. It looks at the whole child. It's very teacher-friendly, and it reflects a widely shared common understanding of educational standards, of how best to measure progress on those standards. So this is very easy for the teachers to work with. It's an electronic-based program. They can go in and log in, do electronic. So I think it's very easy to work with. I have not seen it done yet, but that's something I want to do now that we just implemented in our school this year. So I will be looking at that. So when I do my reform paper, I can actually have some information that I've seen firsthand. So I do plan to go in and watch the teachers assess their students. And I think that's about it.
Okay, good job. Are there questions? Sharon, how do you think this will change? Just, I'm asking you to be look in your crystal ball now, but how do you think this will change, or do you think it'll change anything in terms of induction, enrollment, curriculum? Will it lead us to a place where we'll be maybe I don't know what the right more staggered enrollment of kindergartners? I know we do some of that in a small way at the beginning of the school year, but do you think it'll change the way we bring children into kindergarten?
It may. And I'm not sure. I don't think we do background, as far as what parents' education or anything like that. But it could, put students in groups. I think it might cause some grouping there, when students come in, depending on how they do. Like when you have the beginners day, they come in and you kind of can assess how they are from the very beginning, and you might start grouping students. So it may, if it doesn't come to staggering, then it may just actually have the students grouped in certain levels on how
Sure.
they perform.
Yeah, I've always believed that there's some scheme, some format that would benefit students if we could bring them in, say, take the year-round school model that some of y'all are familiar with in certain systems, and bring in a new group of kindergartners every quarter that are ready. And the question was always asked, well, how do you progress them through the system? Well, they could stay with that cohort, but if they, are ready to advance, and you felt like they were ready to jump forward, if you bring in a new cohort every quarter, kind of like we do in doctoral programs and EDS programs,
right,
and they're ready to jump to another group, there would be a group in front of them that they could jump to. If they're struggling and needed to fall back, you'd have a group coming behind them, and they could lag and stay in that same quarter one more time. I don't know how. I never could figure out in my mind how to translate that once you get to the high school. You wouldn't
right.
be able to do it, but that seems to be the year-round principle of having four, and that's a multi-track system. You could have a multi-track system of kindergarten enrollment that would perpetuate all the way through your elementary grades. And I could see this being a valuable tool in making some of those determinations.
Right. I think that's an excellent idea to have the students stagger. We do have it in times past at my school. We've had students stagger. We would have the A through M's come in the first 2 days, and then we'll have the N to Z come in the next 2 days, and we would do, and then those kids would be off, and we would just do that just to help the students, transition and have not come in all at once, but have a time to work themselves up to a full day.
Yeah.
So that was one way we did it, but not so much the way you said. But I think what you said is it's a very good idea, and it might be something that may come out of this.
Well, if one of you all becomes the king of education and implements that, then, just give me a footnote credit for that somewhere. But, I've always thought that would be a way to restructure or reform really the way we bring children into school. Because, you all who, particularly those who work in primary schools, I've taught down through the 5th grade, but I've not taught any lower than that. You all who are working with kindergartners and first graders know, developmentally, there's a big difference in that kindergarten class from the, maybe at a greater extreme than any other grade level that we have at the very beginning of school. So I see that as being. Any other questions for Sharon about her research or presentation?
And all my references are included in my research paper. So
Great, good, thank you. All right, well, we'll move on. Thank you, Sharon. Good job.
Thank you.
Let me see now. Let me get back. See if I can get hosting duties back here from you. All right. And who would like to go next? Well, who is ready to go next? Who else is ready to go tonight? Surely somebody. Anybody else ready to go tonight?
Dr. Bowles, I am not. This is Danielle.
Okay. All right.
I guess I can if nobody else is then.
Okay, well, you may be the only other one ready, Kevin. I know you sent me your PowerPoint. Let me see if I can get back here and get you situated. Go ahead and pull up your PowerPoint there.
Let's see.
And let me make you the host. You can make it work. And if you'll do the share screen there. And again, I've got yours loaded if we can't make it work. I've got it here on my computer if we can't make it work. So have you got it pulled up on your screen?
Yeah, I have it pulled up on my screen.
Okay, go down to the bottom and do the share screen. And it should open up a box and you should be able to see your PowerPoint.
Is that the participant
No,
ID?
it's the green box that says share screen. If you'll click on that, does that open up a white box for you there that has some things in it?
It's not showing on the bottom of mine.
Okay, now hang on. Let me see if I can. I'll get yours then. Hang on. Hang on. I've got it right here. Yeah. Hang on. Get host back. Okay. Can you all see Kevin's PowerPoint up there yet?
Okay, I see it now.
Okay, I think I might have to run it.
Okay, I see this. Okay.
You see this share?
Yes, I see this screen.
Okay. Well, let me make you host again. Hang on. Y'all just hang loose. If you will do the share screen, click, and you should be able to bring up your PowerPoint.
Okay.
See if you can do that. Is your PowerPoint up on your screen? Hey, I think it's coming. All right, you are in charge. You can just show your slide PowerPoint just like you would normally start, from the slideshow. And
okay.
We're good to go. You can control it from there. We got it. Very good.
Oh. Well, good evening to everyone. I've enjoyed listening to everyone else's presentations. I've just enjoyed being quiet and listening to everyone else, especially when you have to talk so much during the day. This evening, I'm going to be talking about leadership reform, changing of the guard. As you see from I'm a very visual person. So in the picture there that you see a changing of the guard, for me, that's representing top leadership, whether it's two superintendents, one leaving and one coming in. That's what I had in mind whenever I began to do research on this topic about leadership reform. Need to go back one. Let's see here. I think I left out one slide, but in introduction, the reason why I've kind of discussed why I chose this, and for me, doing the research on this particular topic was very personal for me, especially since just going through a transition over the last year and doing the research. I realized that we talk about many forms of reform, whether it's curriculum or other aspects of education, but very rarely do you hear anything about leadership reform. And I felt like it would be important for me to gain more of an understanding about leadership reform, because the transition of leadership are the individuals that will be leading with all forms of reform within the county educational um, system. So there were about five areas that in my research that I looked at, and I am pretty confident for all of you that are in leadership positions and moving up in other leadership positions, that there are some pieces of this that you're going to find helpful, because it's looking at reform from the leader's point of view, what needs to be looked at to make this transition to becoming the next assistant superintendent or superintendent. There's some things that need to be looked at by the individual as they prepare to make this transition in leadership. The first thing I want to talk about is the transition preparation. So the question is, when do you actually begin to prepare? There's preparation that needs to happen to actually get prepared for this transition. So there has to be a different mindset, seeing things a lot differently as you begin to prepare for this transition. How do you prepare? First of all, it's important to do something that is difficult for some people, and that's to self-evaluate yourself as a leader. To actually look yourself in the mirror, or to come up with various personal assessments that you look at your leadership style, the effectiveness of your leadership, to look at some things that might need to be changed before moving into this next position of leadership. What about the tempo? When we're speaking about the tempo is determined by the leader, and it's dealing with change or reform. What types of things need to be changed within the organization, and how quickly do you make these changes? Some things will need to be changed expediently. Some things can be changed over time. So it's going to be important for this new leader to communicate the priority areas of the new plan. Because whenever you come in, you're laying out your vision, you're laying out a new plan that could be totally different than what the prior leader's vision was. So you have to figure out, what kind of tempo am I going to need to set as I take this new role within um, the school system, and creating a sense of urgency in some of the areas that might be high on your priority list. Those things are important as you make this transition. The growth and development deals with those that you lead. As you prepare for this transition, how do you come in and help those that you are leading to grow and to develop? How do you push them outside of the norm, or push them outside of that comfortable box that might have caused the school system to become complacent and stagnant? How do you get them developed? How do you get them thirsty to actually make the next step to make the whole school system better? In the beginning of the tenure, I left off the end on learn, but to learn to become a good listener is going to be key when you're making this transition into this role of leadership. Learning to speak less and to listen more, to having the understanding that those that are already at this particular system, they don't know you yet and you don't know them. So the way that you learn about them is to actually listen to what they have to say, because it's going to be some a period where they're going to be uncomfortable. So listening to them helps them to feel like you're concerned about the things that concern them. So in doing that, you're going to be building relationships, because as you make this transition, it's important to gain a new partnership with those that you're going to be leading. And to be truthful, there are some relationships that can mature over time, and then there's going to just be some relationships that the main focus is going to be the business at hand, and that is looking at the things that's going to make um, what you're doing for the students better. And so as we're looking at these different things here, it's all about laying out the plan, establishing a new regime. Know the next thing is knowing the situation that you're walking into. I think it's really important for anyone who's coming into a position, especially a position of leadership like this. You need to know whether you're replacing an icon, whether you're coming following a train wreck, whether you have been called there to jump start the system, or whether you're someone that's groundbreaking. Maybe you've been brought there to do something that have never been done before. But I think it's really important to know exactly what the situation is whenever you come there in this leadership role, because all of these different situations they're going to need different approaches, because any of these different ways have caused ripples across the system, that you need to have a plan for how you're going to deal with these different things. The best leaders inspire their troops to rally around a change, whereas poor leaders have to push, persuade, or even threaten employees to accept change. Don't want to have to threaten to get others to accept the change. Want to be there to inspire them, have a clear understanding of what's happening, and looking for empowerment, or looking for ways that a partnership can be established to make things better. Communicating more effectively to gain connections. If you're going to connect, people need to know that you understand them. They need to sense that you're there for them. Maxwell talked about that. He was one of the references. There needs to be a connection there. So with this connection there, when the communication is effective, it's a dialogue. It's not just you, the leader, speaking and everyone else listening, but it's a dialogue where there's a connection between both parties. And the last thing is recognizing the importance of negotiation. Negotiation involves buy-in, and buy-in is very important. Buy-in is a very key element, and so having to actually prepare for preparation is the one thing that you can do with negotiations. You never know how a negotiation is going to play out, but you can actually prepare for negotiations, because it's important, because of the buy-in. And when I say negotiate, it doesn't mean simply making decisions that will appease everyone's desires. I'm speaking about negotiating to come to a common ground in small areas that can eventually lead to buy-in in other areas within your plan as the new leader. So it might take some time to build certain parts of the plan. So there again, knowing the tempo that needs to be followed so that your plan comes to pass, being the new leader. One of the hindrances of negotiation occurs when there is a sense of not valuing the person that is being spoken to, or the organization um, that they have been a part of not valuing. So it's important as the new leader to not spend be very careful about speaking about prior experiences, because depending on how those conversations are led, that can be offensive when you're coming into a new organization. Prior experience is beneficial, but the new leader again needs to be careful to not constantly speak about their prior organization. So bringing old things into a new situation sometimes makes it seem that the new organization that you're in is not unique and fresh, but you're simply using a new place to practice old solutions. So want to be careful about that. Don't want to offend those that you're trying to bring this connection with. Expectations, expectations is always important whenever you're stepping into a new leadership role. To have a plan, to have your plan laid out that has the expectations, and we've been talking about it in the class. It has just been eye-opening for me when you begin to talk about your school improvement plan or your county plan and the vision, the goals, your mission statement, all of those pieces that express the leader's expectations. They need to be clear, concise. Upper management need to have your upper brass, your upper leaders within the school system need to have a very clear understanding of what your expectations what your expectations are. Um, a part of your plan is not only dealing with your present issues, but you're imagining the future, both the future of opportunities and of future threats. So not only are you dealing with the things that need to be dealt with right now, but you're also preparing those that you lead. You're preparing the whole school system for things that might come in the future. So you begin to lay those things out as you express your expectations. And when you're making this transition, to motivate those that you lead, because there again you're dealing with change, you're dealing with buy-in, you're dealing with establishing a connection. So you're gonna want to motivate them. You're gonna want to have a very positive, optimistic um atmosphere or environment. But as the new leader, you must be a realist and communicate with those being led through the changes, having effective communication. The new leader must be able to motivate with the assurance that there is light at the end of the tunnel. So, as different things come your way that might be confrontational or might be difficult, to be able to be positive as the leader and to motivate those that you lead that things are going to get better. And the last thing is recognition of reality. And that's to actually look at what's before you, the hard facts. or the data that might be speaking to some areas that you're working on, or some things that you might have just come across because you're new in this position? What do you do with those? What do you do with the data or the facts? You know, you don't just take it at face value, because some data could be biased. You want to make sure that the data is unbiased before you actually use it to implement within your plan. Um, you've got to make a decision about what to ignore. You've got to make a decision about where to make the adjustments and where data should be used. The data should be thoroughly inspected. It should be held to a light so that the credibility can be certified, so that the usefulness of the information or the facts can be used to actually make things better for those that you lead and for the whole school system. The last piece that I want to talk about is a leadership change assessment sheet that I came up with that would help any leader that's getting ready to move and transition into another place of authority. There again, the first questions are going to deal with questions that you ask yourself, because you're going to have to self-reflect, take a look at self, take a look at yourself as the leader to see, you know, what is your vision for the organization? Can you clearly state what your vision is to others? Going into this new position, what is your motivating factor for even desiring the position? What are your priorities? You know, what is your passion? What is it that, you know, you represent, or you want others to say that you represent as their leader? And then it's always important to know what personality is difficult for you to work with, because chances are you're going to run into a personality in your board meetings, or in a meeting or somewhere, that is, at least you have identified what personality that is going to be most difficult for me, so that I can have a plan for how I'm going to deal with that. And then the gut wrenching question is, how well do I listen to others? It's amazing in my studies, most people feel like they're good listeners, but if you're thinking about what you're going to say while someone else is talking, it's not being an effective listener, because you're thinking about what you're going to say next. So how well do you listen to those that are going to be looking to you for direction? What skills do you need to improve upon as you prepare to make this transition? And lastly, what is expected of me going into this new position? Because that's going to set the tone for some things that you're going to have to get prepared for moving into this new position. And lastly, the transition investigation. These things are vital. Why was I even hired for the position? Might have to do a little research and investigation to find out, why was there a vacancy? Why did the last person leave? What was happening under that leadership? What successes or failures happened through the last tenure? What successful processes are already in place? Whenever you come into this new leadership role, there might be some areas that you might not even have to change, because they might be functioning on an optimum level already, to actually investigate and look for those things. Who were the former leaders' supporters? You know, which people are still there that maybe didn't want the last leader to leave? You need to know that, because you never know when that might come up in a meeting, or it might come up when you're dealing with an issue. And then begin to learn who your key supporters are. You know, that circle that you can establish of individual that's going to be there to support you as you look to implement the new vision. Where are immediate changes needed? Knowing where the immediate changes are, that's going to begin to set the tempo. That's going to begin to allow you to see the areas that it's going to be urgent that change is made right away. And most importantly, how will I measure my success during my tenure? How will I know if what I'm doing is working? How will I know that I'm being effective? How will I know that I'm being efficient? So to actually put those things in place as benchmarks to let yourself know whether your vision is actually working and whether you need to make some adjustments to what you're doing. And that's the end of my presentation. If you have any questions or comments.
Questions or comments for Kevin? Kevin, I did like what you said. Sometimes a person changes jobs. It's a new place to practice old solutions. I like that. I hadn't thought about that before. In thinking about the things you shared about, this leadership change, do you think there's a difference in these questions and your approach for somebody who's inside an organization is being promoted versus somebody who's totally from the outside?
I think that it is a different approach because someone that's inside of the organization might have actually dealt with some of those questions, or they might be able to see in depth, even more because they have, more exposure to some of those questions. And I'm a living example of that. As I was, doing the research, I said, gosh, I wish I would have had this before I made my transition, because there's some things that I'm having to go back now and correct that I wish I would have done differently, that I would have been a more efficient leader, making that transition. But I did take a lot of my experiences, things that I had seen being in the organization. It did affect, the decisions that I'm making. A lot of my decisions are based off of my experience here and building relationships that have been built for the 3 years prior to moving into the leadership role. So, building those relationships proved to be um, uh, very, very important. But I would like to say that sometimes it can be difficult to be promoted within, because people can become very, very familiar with you as you make the transition. And I think another important thing is, the whole time I always had in my mind that because I've been promoted within before, so I had it in my mind that I always needed to follow orders. I always needed to do the right thing. I didn't never need to speak against leadership because I knew it was the possibility that I can move up in leadership here. So that can be one of the drawbacks, about moving up in the same organization. If you've had the wrong conversations, or if you spread a lot of your opinions about different things to be promoted within that organization, those individuals that you had those conversations with will probably remember those conversations you had, and it might be difficult to get them to buy in because they remembered how you challenged leadership.
That's true. Very true. So, good. Any other questions? Any comments?
Kevin, can you hear me?
Yes.
I just have a question because I remember reading back in the summer that our legislature in the budget, and someone said that it had actually passed in the state budget for education like a support for administrators. And the reason it caught my eye is a friend of mine, a neighboring district, actually this summer created a new position for it as an administrator coach for new principals and assistant principals. So I was wondering if you've seen anything about that.
I have not, but I sure am gonna go search for.
There was some money I know in the budget for a planning grant to do something that was really moving toward some competency-based training and assessment for administrators, but I don't know what the result of that was. I don't know if that's the same thing or not, Jan, but I did see a little of that at one point. So that was in the budget talks, I believe.
I just, I thought it was a different idea because we've got curriculum coaches
Yeah.
and I know, because a friend of mine applied for the position, and she did not get the job, but because they hired within, but it was just interesting that they were moving in that direction.
Yeah.
So.
And we're actually I'm doing some leadership coaching with, as part of a project we're doing with some folks in one of the counties in the central part of the state. Matter of fact, I'll be down there next week, meeting with principals and doing some coaching, but it's a local project that they're doing that we've been doing a couple of years, doing some training, some book studies, and then some local coaching, which is a good thing, but if you can afford that and collaborate with a university that has people on staff who maybe have been in those roles. Of course, we only have two professors here at Gardner Webb who have been, at the central office level. Rest have been, a couple more have been principals, but you have to have the right people to do that, I guess.
Right.
Good. Any other points or comments, questions? Okay, let me see. Did Adrian join us? I knew Lauren had a school meeting and she may not be able to join us tonight unless she got through in time, so I'm not surprised that I don't believe she's joined us. So I believe that's everybody that we had tonight for presentations, unless somebody joins us here in the next minute or two. Let me go over the assignments for next class. Hang on just a second. Let me reclaim the host and get back to, see if I can pull up, there we are, weekly tasks. Hopefully you can see that. The things that we've got going on here for the next week, or 2 weeks actually. We won't have class next week, I'll remind you, because it is fall break. The first assignment there is the one that I talked about last time. It's found in your Class 7 folder. I hope all of you have already accessed that. It's the school redesign activity. It's really a mock charter school application. And again, I'm not asking you to turn anything in there. Certainly you'll want to read through those questions. The first sheet tells you which questions I'll be looking for you to answer, and make yourself some notes, think through it, answer those questions in your own work there. But again, no work product to be turned in to me. And then in our next class on the 27th, I want you to describe your school, basically answer those questions that I've proposed that you answer in that cover sheet, and tell us what your school would look like. Now, this is your opportunity to design a school of your choosing, and with the ideas that you maybe gained in this class and your reading in other places and other classes. But it's your opportunity to dream a little bit about what you might see your dream school being. So I'll have that on the 27th. I've also asked you by the next class, the 27th, to submit your reflection journal. And there's a place in the week 9 folder to do that. And that really is just your work on how your maybe thinking has changed, the things that have impressed you as you've done research and studied and thought about school reform, and anything that comes to your mind that you think is a significant change in your experience and in your learning and in your reflection there. When we come back together on November the 3rd, we have additional, I think we have 4 more chapter presentations or topic presentations related to your readings. And so Sharon and Jan, you'll have the next presentations on November the 3rd. You should be continuing to work on your system reform plans. You should be well past the needs assessment phase of that and into the actual development of the plan, doing the work there. Again, as always, I'm available should you need any help, counseling, discussion about that. I know some of you have already contacted me, but if you need me to react to any of that or to give you counsel advice on that, certainly I'm here available to do that. Most of you that I've talked to are well on the way to having those done. So if you're not at that point, let this be a kind of a scary warning to you that you need to be moving on that. If you've not, I think I've got most everybody's paper, a couple maybe that have not submitted. So if you've not submitted your paper for this research paper, be sure and get that to me. I'm finishing up. I've got a number of research papers to read and the other class I'm teaching, and so I'll turn next week while you don't have class to reading those. So if you haven't gotten that to me, be sure and get that in and get that to me. Again, no class next week for fall break. We'll meet again on the 27th. Are there questions about any of that? Anybody? Okay, hearing none, we will end class, and I will be sure and post these PowerPoints that we've had tonight online in this week's folder so that you'll have access to those. Good job on those presentations tonight, and I look forward to hearing the other ones when we come back. We'll worry after on the 27th. It may be that we can have at least one of those or 2 of those presentations that night, along with our topic presentations that night. So hope all of you have a good week off for fall break, and stay safe. Good night.
Good night. Dr.
Good night.
Moore, we have a few minutes.
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Hang on just a second. Let me stop this, and let me end the meeting so that, stop the recording rather, so that